everybody, to the TEMSEA Leadership Podcast. My name is Christopher Claus, and I'm your host. Oh, how the tides are turning, Dad. The tides are turning. How does it make you feel to be interviewed today by your son?
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's cool, though. I'm excited.
Yeah. Tell everybody kind of the why behind this interview.
Well, actually, the president of TEMSEA, Shannon Morphus, back in July, we were kind of talking about different things, and she said, hey, I think it would be good for you to be interviewed since you're hosting the podcast. People don't know your story, and by all means, having you actually do the interview. So you've been on this podcast before, and for you to be able to ask questions is kind of a cool thing. So I'm excited.
Well, heck yeah. Just to give you a compliment, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you as the host of the TEMSEA podcast for the past year. I couldn't think of a better candidate as my own father.
Well, this is cool.
All the interviews have been intriguing to me. I hope this one matches them.
Yeah.
If not exceeds them. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we will.
So
it's been awesome, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a huge learning experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of, not knowing how to do it and learning from the guests. So, yeah, man, it's been an awesome ride for the past year.
Yeah. So we'll jump right in.
Yes, do it.
You're releasing a new book.
Yeah.
Probably soon whenever this is released.
Yeah.
And we kind of want to not only promote your book,
Mm-hmm.
but set the stage around it. We
Yeah.
want to tell your story.
Yeah.
To the audience. Some of you, this may be your first time listening. Some of you may have known my dad Eric for a long time, and but we need to set the ground for everybody. We want to know your story and how the heck you've got to be a second-time author. Not everybody can say, I'm a two-time author.
Yeah, right.
My dad's a two-time author.
So when you say that, it is so weird because I do not see myself as an author. Is that crazy?
Yeah.
I
crazy.
really absolutely do not. Anyway, but yeah, I know we're going to dive into that, but
all right, so we'll start from the beginning. I think it's important for you to tell everybody where you were raised, where you're from.
Yeah.
Just give a quick overview of your childhood and adolescence that led up to you becoming interested in the field.
yeah, that's a cool question. So I grew up actually in the inner city of Baltimore, and I haven't been able to take you and Rachel, your sister, there because it's kind of an unsafe area. At the time, it wasn't. And we had all of our family that kind of lived on our block or two in a row home. So there was no grass. And life was pretty cool. And, we were close as a family. So that's kind of where I grew up. And not uncommon, I think, especially with our generation, is I guess the first challenge was my dad, your granddad. He died in 20, and but he left us to be raised by Mom, your grandmom, when I was 4 and Gary was 6 or 7. So it was a single parent home, and so I kind of, my mom, your grandmom, kind of served as a father figure, mother figure, and she worked, and I think that's probably where I got my work ethic from, is her, supporting 2 kids, and it was great watching her. I learned so much, but I always lacked a father figure, although I had men in my life. Well, we moved out of the city when I was 10, to a suburb area, and made a great friend of mine. We're still friends to this day. His name's Tom, and we were walking near his home. He lived right near a fire station, volunteer fire station, and he told me, he was like, hey man, I'm getting ready to join the fire department. I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. I'm like, what do you mean you're getting ready to join the fire service? He said, yeah, you can do that when you're 16. So anyway, I did, and my mom, your Mimi, actually signed a consent that I could, become a firefighter. And I fell in love with it. And that was really the structure that I really felt like a young person needed. It was a little bit different there because it was very, very structured. We went to fire school in the evening time. And I remember riding the back step of a fire truck, going down the road and just hearing the sirens just blare, and my love of the emergency show, that was real to me. I was fascinated by that. And so that's kind of where it all started for me. And then, slowly progressed into going to EMT. So I was an EMT in high school.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I got bit by the emergency services bug. I loved it. It was in my blood. I did it for no pay.
Right.
And it was an amazing experience as a young person.
Yeah, so you said it gave you structure.
It did.
So it kind of replaced the fatherly figure that you needed, that young men need in their late adolescence, their early adulthood.
Yeah.
It gave you that structure.
Yeah, like non-military. You know what I mean? I'm sure with military, but here I'm 16 years of age. I'm just driving. I think I have all the answers as a young person. And, all of a sudden, discipline comes into structure and protocols. And so, it was a very powerful realization of, people know more than me, right? As you're that age, you're always thinking that you have the answers. At least I did. So it was powerful.
Yeah. So you became a paramedic at the age of 20.
Yeah.
And that is rare. I don't know if I've ever really met another person, especially currently, that has gone through paramedic school by the age of 20. So what was that like back then? Because I can imagine right now, I'm 19. If I turn 20 tomorrow and I'm responsible for pushing like 25 medications, I'm in the captain's chair on the back of the ambulance. I mean, that's intense.
It was intense. And I started paramedic school when I was 19. And it's interesting that you say that, because I am thankful that I thought I knew everything, right? So I think it was actually easier being 19 or 20, because I started working as a medic a few weeks before my 21st birthday. So I had a very limited amount of experience. So I didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. And fortunately, being paid as a paramedic, just about everybody that was in the service I was working for was older than me. So that provided that structure and that guidance that I needed. And I remember the partner that I had at the time was very experienced in life. His name's Billy, and he was a rodeo guy, like a true cowboy. And I am so thankful that him and I were partners, because he had the maturity truly and the experience. So, that was probably my first experience of understanding how you rely on other people to help you. And I truly got a sense of that from the very beginning. But to go back to your question, it was a cool moment to be able to say that. But I will tell you, on the funny side, many people that I took care of, here I am, this young kid that has a paramedic license, and, it took a while to convince people to let me take care of them. So,
I'm sure.
Yeah, that influence thing was real. So, but it was awesome.
I'm sure that was a proud moment for your family too, and your mom.
Yeah, it was.
Because she doesn't have an education.
Yeah.
Past high school.
Right.
And
most people didn't back then.
Yeah, in the inner city, working in the factories and whatnot. You don't really have to, just blue collar worker.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that was a fascinating moment for your family.
Yeah, it was cool.
So your first book is about your experience with PTSD and your journey through that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure whenever you got your license at 20, you never imagined you were going to have to quit.
Yeah.
Being a paramedic.
Right.
Due to depression / PTSD.
Right.
And all that came with that. So can you describe how in the world you got PTSD in those 10 years of being a medic? So just kind of describe the timeline up until you got PTSD.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question, Chris. And what is probably the important thing to know is that I probably was having symptoms of post-traumatic stress and depression probably 5 years before I knew what it was. So I was in a relationship, I use that word, with the challenges, but because of the time and place that we were in, no one talked about it. So I didn't know I had it until it was almost at the end of the journey. So to go back to some of the things that I realize now in hindsight and in looking back on them was at first, you would go to a traumatic call. Not that you wanted that to happen, but it was an exciting and you were glad to provide care and, you felt like the hero. You felt like you put the cape on and you were running into danger and you come out and you're like, wow, I made a huge difference. And I remember being excited about that. But over a period of time, I would probably use the analogy, regardless if we're in the EMS or any field, is that I felt like there was a lot of compound effect, a lot of bad things, we were deputy coroners as well. So you were involved in a lot of cases that were not normal, murders, you were part of, seeing those type of things of, dead children, dead adults, motor vehicle crashes. And those were just like deposits that were being put in there. And then it got to a point slowly, the change happened slowly. It wasn't like one call, it was multiple calls. And then all of a sudden, there was a hurricane, I guess you would say, or a tornado that was completely almost debilitating to me, where it was like I'm in crisis mode. But there was a lot of symptoms that were going on that I had no idea what they were at the time. And that was sort of the essence of writing the story, is to get that out there so people would know what some of the warning signs were. But towards the end, it was pretty intense. I know we're going to get into that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So whenever you said the hurricane came,
Yeah.
the compound interest finally
Yeah. I mean, it was
finally crushed you.
Yeah.
How did that affect your family?
Yeah. Well, in looking back onto that, your mom, I interviewed her years ago for a project that I was doing on the stress project, and she had made a comment, and it really kind of sat in. She said, "Eric, the changes that occurred for you were over time, and it was just slowly getting worse to the point that you were a different person if you were to look at where you are today versus where you are 5 years ago. But because the change happened so slow, you didn't feel like you needed to do anything about it." So, yeah, it certainly was intense from that aspect. Did you want me to kind of go through what some of the symptoms were, or I don't want to steal question-wise, but I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah. Just go through the first symptom, and we can refer back to it.
Okay. So in hindsight, looking at some of the symptoms, there was a call that I realized something was really wrong. I had a student with me, and we responded to a motor vehicle crash on the interstate. And we knew it was bad. We knew fatalities were involved, and it was nighttime. So when we arrived on the scene, if those that are listening to this can relate, you are seeing, the lights flash, and there's glass, there's debris all over the roadway, and there's a car upside down as we approach, and the other team is there, and they're taking care of the patients that survived. And we had some non-critical patients, but I had a student with me. And I knew, this sounds really bad for people that are listening to this, is that anytime that you had a student and you had a fatality, part of the responsibilities were to take that student and to introduce them to seeing maybe a body for the first time. Mm-hmm. So this person, and I apologize for the graphic nature of this, the patient was in a high-speed rollover, and part of the door and the frame separated, and it was a near decapitation of the patient. And so I knew when I was walking up to the scene, you could tell by the blood and the debris that was there, I uncovered the patient to show the student. And I told him ahead of time, I said, what you're getting ready to see is going to be rough. I said, if you have to turn your head, it's totally fine. But this is just part of the deal. So, Chris, I uncovered this. Turned out to be a teenage girl, and it was a mess. And I started sharing with him, the seatbelt, all of the things that went on. And I walked away after we did that, and my heart rate never changed. That never affected me. And I literally could have went out to dinner right after that, feeling no emotion. That was terrifying. And that was probably the first true indicator that something was going on. And I wanted to feel emotion, and I didn't. And that was sort of the beginning. And then over a period of years, the second thing that I'll share with you was what I've known now to be called a thought intrusion.
Yeah.
You want me to talk about that?
We'll come back to the thought intrusions. But yeah, tell everybody what your first thought intrusion was, and then we can later explain.
Yeah. Ooh, this is intense, and every time that I even talk about it now, I don't know if emotion's going to come out or not. So I try to get myself in the frame that I try not to feel what I'm about to say, but it's so deep inside of me. Is your sister, Rachel, 24 years old, and when she was born, it was a cool thing. The way that all unfolded, and I took a little bit of time off work, and when I did go back to work, I dreaded that call that every person hates to deal with, whether you're a nurse, whether you're on the ambulance, helicopter, whatever it is. You never get used to dealing with kids.
Yeah.
And I knew it was going to be intense. And I was praying that the call didn't happen. And that worked for about 2 months-ish. And then the call came in. And it was the time of the day that we already knew what was going to happen. It was the morning call of a young child not breathing. And we knew right away, and the scenario is mom or caretakers go to check on the infant, and they stop breathing during the night. And unfortunately, most are dead when we get the call. So we respond to the call, and my partner and I, who is also a paramedic, we're kind of talking about the plan. And my heart rate is just kicking up at this point. And so the plan was he's going to go in the house, and he's going to get the baby, and I'm going to go in the back of the ambulance and set everything up, equipment, airway, IV equipment. So that's kind of how it unfolded. So he runs into the house. It seems like moments later, he's at the back of the ambulance doors. And this was almost like a Matrix experience. Is at that moment, things went into slow motion. Seeing him there with that kid coming up in the back of the ambulance, and we're doing CPR, we're doing all of the things, and literally it is in slow motion. It's almost hard for me to describe it. The Matrix movie is the best analogy of that. And so we're trying to do an airway, and that's not working, so my partner takes over, and then I go down to start an interosseous infusion, which is where the needle goes in the bone. And I grab this little girl's leg. By the way, is the same age as your sister.
Yeah.
And when I grab this patient's leg, this little girl's leg, and I start putting the needle into her bone, I am now in a thought intrusions. I didn't know what it was at the time, but this is what I would describe. That patient became your sister. And it wasn't a thought, it was real. It was like a dream that I couldn't get out of. And it paralyzed me. And I froze, apparently. And I don't know how long it lasted, but my partner yelled my name. And I remember snapping back to reality and looking around and thinking, where am I? And I'm looking down, is this Rachel? And it wasn't Rachel. And then I'm realizing that I'm back into this emergent situation, and I kind of go through the flow, and, we go to the hospital. But after we got to the hospital, unfortunately, that patient had died, and I never told my partner, who's a great friend of mine today. We're still friends. And he never knew, and I was freaked out. And so I kept that to myself. And that was my first experience with a thought intrusion.
Yeah. So that's about 10 years
Yeah.
after you first got your
Mhm.
paramedic license. So
Yeah.
you're around the age of 30.
Mhm.
And now you're dealing with full-on PTSD.
Not knowing it, by the way.
Yeah, not really
Yep.
understanding what it is
Mhm.
and how it can affect you. And you just think there's something wrong with you, probably. You just
Oh
think
yeah,
you're a unicorn.
I do.
So you're dealing with post-traumatic stress, and you quit, and you realize you have to go to nursing school. So
Yeah.
describe that decision
Yeah.
before we get into you writing.
Yeah. So it wasn't a decision of I just need out. I had another thought intrusion that was probably months after. It's hard for me to put the timeline on. But I'm at home with your mom. We had just built a new home, and we're in the kitchen. And I noticed I took a little bit of time off, and I couldn't rest. I was just really uncomfortable. It was really kind of bizarre. And we're in the kitchen, and your mom comes in with Rachel in a car carrier, and she sets her on the table. And I pick her up, and I'm cooking, I think, at the stove, doing something. And all of a sudden, I'm holding her, and not provoked by anything, and another thought intrusion blindsides me. And here I am, I'm caught in this moment. And I'm not even going to tell everybody what it is. I'm going to give you the high points. It was so intense. But I watched your sister die in my arms. Like literally, she died. She bled to death in my arms. And I don't know how long that thought intrusion lasted, but it seemed like it lasted friggin' hours.
Long enough.
It was, yeah, long enough. Well, when I came back to reality, and I'm dancing back and forth between reality and thought intrusion, I'm like, this is Rachel. She's not bleeding. And my thought goes back to the thought intrusion. So I'm kind of dancing with this, and then I kind of become conscious, I guess you could say, and I'm looking down, and I'm like, okay, she's not dead. She's alive. I'm looking around, and there was no blood on the floor, which in my thought intrusion it was. And I'm like, oh, what is happening? So I gather my senses, and I go put her in her car seat. And I walk out of the room. And this is what came to my mind, Chris, is this is not going to end well. And going through, some of the story, which I wrote in great detail, and it's painful to talk about it, and I know we're going to dive into that, but for 3 days I went with no sleep and battling thought intrusions and battling waking up or going to wake up fearing that the worst thing was going to happen. Tired, being exhausted. And I just thought, there's only one way to end this, and it was suicide. And I almost wrestled with God. I know we're going to talk about faith, but that was my first encounter with having an argument with God, which I felt like I was a believer back then, but I'm in a different place.
Yeah.
And I just remember, God, are you kidding me?
Right.
This is how my life is going to end. And yeah, so that was my first battle with God, and I just could not believe where I was.
And how you got there.
And how I got there. And then I'm gonna close with this and let you ask some more questions pertaining to this. But at that moment, I felt like I was isolated, in that the only reason that I was considering, and it wasn't like I was considering I wanted to die. I felt like I didn't have a choice but to die, and I knew how to do it. And that is when I felt like God spoke to me, but it wasn't like I heard his voice. When people say, I heard God speak, I've never heard God speak, but I felt the presence. And and this is what it was. It was intense pressure. I've never had it since. And what happened was there was such a feeling of these words almost exactly. You're not going to die. You can't do this on your own. You have to give up the fight.
Yeah.
And that was the turning moment. And that literally, Chris, it was the light switch moment for me that I really felt like, God was speaking to me. And I didn't know why at the time. Is that at that moment was the decision for me to tell your mom
Mm-hmm.
and to go get professional help. And that was the sequence of events where I'm now in a professional's office. And he basically tells me this. I'm using my words. You stay in the field, you die. You leave and you live.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I viewed that. So that is why I resigned, and no one knew why.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I would say even from a person who has never struggled with suicidal thoughts,
Yeah.
it is scary to me to think I even have the potential
Yeah.
to kill myself.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm sure through those 3 days you're thinking, I have a family, I have a wife, but have a potential to kill myself
Yeah.
right here, and I could rationalize it like that to
Yeah.
myself.
Well, let me interject for just a
Yeah.
second, because with speaking all over the country and having met people that their loved ones have died by suicide, I have heard this comment. I didn't think we were going to go here, but I think it's important. Is that I have heard that it is a selfish act, and
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. From my view, Chris, I did not have the capacity to think about your mom or Rachel. I am in such chaos and distress that none of that could penetrate what was happening. Yes, I had awareness that they were there, but the chaos was so intense that I could not think about what they were thinking about.
Yeah.
And that is an interesting, I think, thing. We know suicide is prevalent in our field in emergency services. But every time that I hear that, it hurts me. And in fact, I had a call recently with someone that I know that that one of their team members had died by suicide. And unfortunately, if you do this long enough, you're going to get those calls, and it absolutely sends chills up my spine.
Oh yeah, because you've been in this field a long time. You've
100%.
seen it over and over and over again.
I don't even like to count how many people
Yeah.
and how many partners I've had over the years.
Yeah.
Here I am, 34 years as a paramedic, over 35 years. Well, let's do the math here. So in 1986 is when I started doing this, and here it is in 24, so 38 years. There's been a lot of people that unfortunately are not with us today from that, and I feel a sense of responsibility
Yeah.
to share the message with people.
Yeah, to going back to what you said, I've heard a lot too. Suicide is a selfish act, and
Yeah.
and you can easily lay that argument out on the
Yeah.
table. But people don't realize if they're in those same set of circumstances, they would be going through the exact same
Yeah.
thing. I was reading Galatians 6 this morning, and Paul basically says in that, he's like, don't compare yourself to somebody else.
Yeah.
Because if you were in that circumstance,
100%.
you would have that same capacity, and you would be crumbling just like they are
Exactly.
mostly. Like, you have to compare yourself to who you were yesterday.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson has a chapter in one of his books about that. You have to compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is
Yep.
today. And Ed Milet recently interviewed, was it Granger Smith? Is that his name, the country music singer?
I think that's his name.
And, yeah. And he almost committed suicide, and his suicide story, or overcoming it,
Yeah.
is one of the most fascinating stories I've heard. He literally had the gun
Yeah.
in his mouth, and he has a supernatural faith experience where he comes to Christ in that moment.
Yep.
And that is similar to your
It
story.
was.
So, and Granger Smith wrote a book, and I haven't read it, but I would recommend people going to check out that story, because especially if you're dealing with suicide, or you know somebody dealing with suicide, that's a resource.
Yeah.
Your book's a resource. There's resources
Yeah.
out there, and like you said, isolation is
It's
the
terrible.
it's the epitome of what you need. In
It
that.
is.
And people need other people. They
Yep.
need resources. So, and they're out there.
Can I share
Yeah.
one more thing about suicide? I've never shared this with you before, and I don't even talk about it, just because I don't think about it much. But after hearing my story and presenting, a guy shared with me that he is in the bathroom with a gun in his mouth,
Golly.
and he looks into the mirror, and he sees my face.
Oh gosh, I've never heard this.
And I don't tell that story for people as for me, but it was the story. And he said what came to his mind was, if Eric can do it, I can do it. And when he told me this, I didn't know what to say. But I think the common theme with that is why the story is so important, and why I feel like we have an obligation on this podcast and even in our circle of friends, is that people connect with the challenges that we have in the story. And we've almost heard, like, people are impressed with your successes, but they're really impacted by your challenges and your struggle. And that's what it was. And, we talked a little bit about that, but that was not about me. And that's why I feel such a heavy responsibility to share the story, is because this is sort of the impact. And basically what it is me too. That's what it is that, the story is the story. Many people have had it, but it's somebody standing up in front of the room and saying, I've dealt with it. Me too. I've been through the struggles of marriage. I've had to dance with this post-traumatic stress thing for almost 25 years. Like, me too. Life is not easy. You may see this and you're like, oh, okay, great. He's got everything in order right now. Life's still a challenge for me.
Yeah. That's the power. We'll get into you writing the first book, but that's the power of story. People are attracted to stories. Yes. They've been attracted to stories for as long as humans have 100%. Been on this earth. They've wrote stories, and people are attracted to stories.
Absolutely.
And if you can go through it, like you said, somebody else can go through it.
Definitely.
If you went through it, there's no reason somebody else can't go through it as well.
Definitely.
It has been done, and it will be done.
Yes.
That kind of mentality. So, when did you start writing about your experiences? Because you told me yesterday, whenever you first started writing, you never thought you were going to share it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it was in 2007, and I remember just thinking, I'm gonna write this down. And so it was in the evening times. I would go upstairs and I would type, and I started documenting some of the stories. It was intense. Like, some of the stories I was writing, I literally was taken back to those situations. My heart rate bouncing up, my almost sweating at the time, like getting in the emotional response as the cause. And I remember it in writing some of these and just going, oh my gosh, like I'm actually reliving it. But you're right, I never wrote those stories with the intent to do it as a book. That probably was months into it, and I shared that with your mom, and I shared that with Gary, who edited the first book and the second book, and they both kind of looked at me, not puzzled, not, trying to, tear me down, but it was almost like, okay, like really? And I said, yeah. I said, I don't know what this is going to be about, but I'm in the middle of writing right now. And so, yeah, that was the first experience. I never intended it to be the resource that it is today.
Yeah.
It never started out that way.
Well, what even initially led you to write then?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I honestly, I don't know. I was feeding my mind a lot with, personal development and those type of things. And maybe it came from a thought of, why not me? I mean, like, what makes me any different than the people that I'm, reading their books? And so it just, maybe it was a God moment that start writing, but understanding it wasn't just about writing. It wasn't about do a book. It was about journaling. And maybe I heard something about clarifying your thoughts. Yeah, it was an interesting 3 years. Really, it was.
Yeah. So, would you encourage other people, especially in the EMS industry, who have maybe dealt with thought intrusions? Would you encourage them to write about their experiences?
Hands down, yes. Now, I have a non-traditional way of writing, and some people are going to be fascinated with this because I've had some conversations. Is I have a very difficult time sitting down, and I don't type fast, but I have great flow of rhythm with stories and ideas that come to me. So I was writing by typing originally, but later on I put the book down when I went to get my master's because I couldn't focus on that. And then when I was done, I picked back up and got with Gary and we edited it. But at that point, my writing is by dictating, and I do it with my phone app. And there's times that I create a lot of things that way. I create lecture material because I'll get thoughts, and sometimes I get thoughts by listening to the audios in the car, whatever it may be. I'm like, wow, I need to capture that, and then I'll hit dictate, and then I'll go through that, and then I'll come back and I'll organize it a little bit later. So would I encourage people to do it? 100%, because I would encourage people to write or however in form or fashion, but to go back and listen to it or read it because it's powerful. So I would encourage people to write, not necessarily to do a book, but everybody has a story. And maybe it's just for your family or your kids. It's totally fine. You don't have to get it published. That's a lot of work, by the way. But writing is a powerful, powerful thing, or journaling, whatever you call it. Yeah.
Yeah, it helps you work through your experiences.
Yes.
It helps you put them on paper and organize them and say, okay, well, here's what happened.
Yes.
And maybe I can draw a lesson learned from it.
Oh, yeah.
I even like to journal about certain landmarks in my life. Like after my first semester of college, I wanted to write like the day after I got out of the first semester so I can later look back on that in life. So my kids may look back on that in life. And read about that because I don't want to forget how I felt. It captures your emotions,
And you only have one moment to do that, by the way.
Right, yeah, it's very limited time.
If it comes to you, you got to do it, and it's never convenient.
Yeah.
Just do it. It only takes you a few minutes to jot down the ideas, and I have dozens of pages, maybe hundreds of pages of material that I've written over, the last 15 years, and they're still there. I can still access them at any time.
Yeah, it's super cool. Just to give this to everybody, there's scientific evidence that says writing in general, whether it's good or bad writing, it doesn't matter. It seems to help somebody recover from traumatic experiences, especially 3 to 6 months down the road. So if something happens, you write about it, it helps you recover from that, and you really see the impact about 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, I could see that, definitely.
I thought that was an interesting fact, and I wanted to share that. Okay, so I want you to tell everybody what a thought intrusion is, because I want to know, too, from just writing about your thought intrusions, did you, re-experience them when you wrote about them? And so set the ground and the stage for thought intrusions and what they are and how that was writing.
Eric's description. This is not scientific. You could probably look on Google about having it the proper definition. But for me, what it was, and from people that I've met, my definition of it is you have an uncontrollable input of a thought that basically overtakes you. It's not just like a daydream. You're like, for a second you kind of drift off into space. This is not that. That thought intrusion is, a moment where you are in a movie where it is happening and you can't do anything about it. I've heard some people's description of in the ER where I've gone, this is someone else's words, I go into a room and all of a sudden I see someone I love that is on that bed. Like, that's a thought intrusion. It may last a few seconds. It may last, a minute. But that's a thought intrusion. This is different than a conscious thought. A conscious thought, which I have a lot of them, where I think about an event that happened. I think about a good experience or I think about a bad experience. Maybe I'm driving on the interstate and I remember that crash that was there. That's a thought. That's not a thought intrusion in my mind. But this thought intrusion is, it overtakes you and it almost paralyzes you to the moment. And that is my experience from people that I've talked to that have had those. And yes, does that help answer the question? Yeah.
So did writing help you with that?
No, because I think it was two separate things.
Okay.
I think writing helped me process my thoughts, but the thought intrusions were standalone. It was its own unique storm. It was its own tidal wave that came in. But the writing helped me clarify my thoughts and stacking them in order to help know where I am, maybe danger signs, maybe some risk, whatever it is. That is a separate thing. But yes, the writing helped me with thoughts, but nothing. This is two separate things. The thought intrusion is standalone.
Okay, so let's say somebody's listening and they're listening to this. They had a thought intrusion yesterday. They haven't told anybody.
Yep.
How or where do they go?
Yeah.
What's their first step?
This is easy for me, is that it's a normal response to seeing traumatic things. For first, if someone is listening to this and it's like, oh my gosh, I have had several of these, it's normal. But you can't do it on your own. That is kind of like the tap out. If you're in the UFC fighting, you're tapping out, meaning now you need someone to help you get through that so they don't continue to build up to where it's going to cause you more problems. So it's the first sign of, I'm not doing this on my own. Go get help. It's, yes, I've been there. I understand how, I'm going to try to use the correct words. It was the most difficult thing I had to do with a super type A personality. 20 years old, I can go into the worst of the situations, not get upset, keep my crap under control. For me to ask for help, are you kidding me? When I got over that, and now it's not even an issue because I have a group of friends that I can call and say, hey, I'm struggling. So my threshold is much different. But for those individuals, definitely know it's normal. But number two is that is the sign that, in my opinion, that you need to go to your EAP. You need to tell someone close to you, whatever it is. But don't beat yourself up over it. It's a normal thing based on what we see. Even you don't even have to be in EMS or nursing to have a thought intrusion. You could have a traumatic experience. We have, friends that have been in very traumatic situations that are not healthcare, that seen something happen. They're having thought intrusions and it's freaking them out. It's like, okay, time out. It's normal. But understand that at that point, you need somebody to help you along the way. You need somebody to help you off the field to get you strong again so you can re-enter.
Yeah. You often tell me in relation to pretty much anything in life, pay on the front end or pay on the back end. It's your choice. You can pay now for education or you can pay later for education, but it's going to be much harder to pay for it down the road.
Yeah.
If you can either pay the expense of a thought intrusion now and reach out. That expense is much shorter, much cheaper than the expense of suicide.
Yes.
So I think if you think of it that way, that may help.
Yeah. And just let it go. If we're needing an encouraging word to everybody out here, me too. I've dealt with it. It's okay. When I was going through this experience, Chris, I've used this and it's misunderstood. I turned out to be the most selfish individual of anyone that I knew. It wasn't selfish as I was just thinking about me, is that is when my priorities came into check, that I knew if I wasn't healthy and I could not be in the right place, I couldn't take care of the family. I could not be a good provider. So selfishness in a good way is that everything matters to me right now. This is part of that. You gotta walk through the journey with someone.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's jump to you being willing to share your experience. You published your book and you're starting to speak about it.
Yeah, this was in 2014, by the way.
2014, okay.
With the book, the release,
Okay. And so you're sharing about your experience.
Yeah.
You're speaking about it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're getting a lot of positive feedback,
Yeah.
too. You're probably glad you did it. And in your second book, the one that you're about to release, I quote you right here. At the end of one of your first lectures on stress, somebody approached you, and they said, okay, what do we do about stress that our healthcare providers are under? And you said, I don't know, but the first step is awareness.
Yeah.
And we're clearly making the problem aware right now.
Right.
Which is amazing. But do you feel that EMS in general is beyond the stage of awareness. I say this because your book, your whole entire book, the first and the second, it offers much more than just the problem.
Yeah.
You can bring awareness to a problem and not bring a solution.
Yeah.
So I say this because your book, it offers solutions, practical steps that people can go through no matter what challenge they face in their life.
Yeah.
But do you feel that we're beyond just a stage of awareness?
100% yes. I want to take everybody back for just a second. So when I start presenting the information, I know going into it that I don't have solutions. So I'm already going into it with half of the answers. So part of that comment was one of the first presentations that I did with some executives in a hospital system. And I knew that. I knew there were no answers that were readily available, but you had to start. And it was like, I just had to do it. I had to share the story. And it was a Me Too story. It's like, I know you're in a hard spot. I know you need help, but I'm just telling you. Now, I'm going to fast forward. I'm at a conference not long ago, and it's a suicide prevention conference. So I'm in the room, and all across the vendor, all across the walls are the vendor areas. So there's a dozen vendors that are literally there as resources. And I mentioned during that lecture, as I said, I want everyone in the room to understand 10 years ago, this wasn't the case. Like today, you could go to any one of those tables and say, I think I need to talk to someone, and they have a list of resources. We are 100% in a different place, but I can tell you where the obstacle is. It's us.
Yeah.
We are the obstacle because we think we're these type A, this is my story, type A personality, that I have it all together, that I have the answers. And it almost creates a false facade of I'm strong, like I'm looking in the mirror, I'm not seeing the real person. We're the obstacle to get the help because we think we have it together. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. I met a guy at a conference years ago in the Midwest, and he comes up to me and he's classic post-traumatic stress. And I don't have the ability to diagnose, but it's classic. He is heading for disaster. And I write about this in the second book. He's heading for disaster. I ask him, why are you not going to get help? And this is what he says. I just can't admit. I was taken back. I'm like, do you understand in 1 year, you are going to lose everything that's precious in your life, possibly your life, and you're telling me you can't do it because of pride? I can't help you. That's how abrasive this conversation was. So to go back to that, we are way in a different place. The resources are there, but it is up to us to initiate them.
Yeah, that's so encouraging. So in these last 10 years, how long has it been since you released the first book?
So the first book was in 2014.
So it's been 10 years.
It's been 10 years.
Okay, so you've shared your experiences in these past 10 years. You've gone to conferences. You've gave plenty of lectures on stress. What has caused you to want to add to that first book?
Well, in the very beginning, in 2014, when the book was published, I was a little bit scared, if you want to know the truth. I'm getting ready to be vulnerable in the first time. Like, I'm getting ready to lay it out there. There's going to be things discussed about me, about our family. It is a very intense place, so I felt like I took a huge risk. It was very uncomfortable, and I never, like, I gave it to a couple of people, and then people started contacting me like, hey, I want your story, and then I started getting feedback, and then people were saying, hey, we have it on the station table, and we use this as a resource for people that are getting hired. I never intended for that. But over the period of years, I'm like, is there anything else? Like, can I share, what else? And then I developed a lecture a couple of years ago that I think really cemented this, and it was called On the Other Side of Post-Traumatic Stress.
Yeah.
And during that lecture, such as, the potential title of that book. We're not quite there yet. We're dancing with, some titles, but I just felt like it was important for people to know that there is life on the other side of it. And there's a lot of great resources, but I really felt like I had the opportunity to share the other side of it. Like, what has it been like for me to move on with my life, to become stronger? How do I think? What are some experiences that I shared? And so I felt like it wasn't as big of a risk for me, because I'm not trying to get praise from everyone. It really, that may sound weird. It's doing it as a tool and a resource to help people. That is my motive with that. It was not about becoming a two-time author. It was like I really felt like I have a responsibility and an obligation to help my fellow brother and sister to go through challenging things. And I just felt like, man, there's a lot of stories, and I captured them over the years with, dictating my writings. I'm like, I think I got something here. And then I talked to a couple of different people, and they were like, yeah, do that. So, and the whole presence of the book is that the original story is in the book, because we couldn't take it out with your uncle and my brother Gary with editing. It was such a standalone. We felt like it was important for people not have to buy both books. If you haven't got the first book, you don't need it. The second book has the stories, but there's a lot of different things in there in addition to that. So, so that's kind of where we were with that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for tuning into episode 1. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please stay tuned for part 2. It's coming in the next couple of weeks. I want to take this time to tell you to please subscribe to the podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. On YouTube, you can go watch the video recording of this podcast. Maybe you'll enjoy that. But please subscribe. We would love it for you to be a part of this project. Last but not least, go purchase a copy of Eric Claus's new book, On the Other Side of Post-Traumatic Stress. You can find it at ericclaus.com. Go purchase a copy. Go purchase a copy for your friend. Go purchase a copy for yourself. We would love that. Have a great day. God bless you.